Hello boys and girls, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. And speaking of boys and girls, we're still looking at male audience at 93.4% on Ushanka Show, and female audience it's only 6.4%. And today we have the final episode number 30 of my book review, Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside of the Soviet Union by Robert Robinson. Amazing book. I never planned to have so many videos about it, but as I started looking at it and reading it and making notes, I realized there is so much to discuss. So here we are, final episode number 30. And as always, a quick reminder, just in case for those who are brand new to my channel is growing slowly, but it's still growing, that I have a separate playlist where all the videos located on this book, Black on Red, and the link will be in the comment sections below. Okay, so we left off when Robert Robinson finally got on a plane and he's flying from Moscow to Uganda, and on the way they landed at Khartoum in Africa, and this is his first emotions after landing in Africa. This is Africa, I thought, a place I have heard and read so much about, but I have never seen. And remember that story when the Soviet doctor told Robert Robinson that you need to move to the warmer climate when he was in Kuibyshev, Siberia, otherwise you will never chase zebras again. I thought it was a classical Soviet joke, racist joke. So anyway, so he writes, I felt a sense of reverence as if I were on a pilgrimage to the land of my ancestors. When the plane landed, we were allowed to disembark for 20 minutes. When I stepped onto Sudanese soil, I felt I was returning from the dead. The people looked so beautiful, so open, so warm, so friendly. I wanted to kiss everyone I saw. Freedom! Freedom! I wanted to shout about it, revel in it, absorb every bit of it, all at once. I was intoxicated. I wanted to leap, dance, and sing. You know, it's interesting. When I, for the very first time, managed to leave Soviet Union, and I don't count my trips to Poland because I was smuggling alcohol on a train. I mean, it was an awesome experience as well, but it was a totally different story. But when I flew to Germany for the very first time back in 1993 or 1992, so right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I had different emotions. I mean, I wasn't escaping, right? I just came for a visit. But it was amazing feeling that I was in the movie because, you know, you got everyone speaks German around you. There's a German cars, everything's so unfamiliar. I literally felt like I was in the movie. It was the most insane, beautiful feeling. And then again, when first time I flew to United States in 1995, it was the same feeling of unreal realities. Like you just don't believe your own eyes because like, oh, this is America, you know. New York, World Trade Center back then in 1995. So yeah, totally different emotions, but I understand Robert Robinson really well. Okay, so back to Comrade Robinson. So now he gives us his summary of his life in the Soviet Union. It's pretty impressive. So he's back on a plane, got 3 hours to fly. At that moment, 44 years of injustice and hardship in the Soviet Union passed before me. The racism, the KGB, the perpetual gloom, the loss of friends through imprisonment, banishment, and execution, the open and disguised contempt, the impediment to romance, the isolation. I could nothing to stop the thoughts, the memories, the feelings. I was surprised that I did not feel angry because of all nights when I was cooped in my tiny apartment and nearly consumed by anger. But as the plane started to descend, my heart was at ease and I felt good. As just a quick note, I still couldn't figure out if he ever had a girlfriend in Soviet Union in Moscow. He never mentioned anything. He just said impediments to romance. And I don't know what the word impediment means. I need to look it up. But like all other guys had no problem finding the Russian girlfriends. But sounds like for some reason, Comrade Robertson had problems with that. And they finally landed. The stewardess opened the front door and people began to displane. I walked up the aisle to the top of the mobile stairs. I looked out and felt embraced by the warm sun. I remembered my first boat ride on the Volga and my surprise at the way the Russians nearly worshipped the sun. 43 Russian winters later, I felt the same way. I grabbed the hold of both railings, for I was shaking, and I started walking down the steps. Okay, so let's do a quick refresher. We're back to page 56 from the page 390. So during our boat trip on Volga, I learned that Russians love the sun. At first glance, they appear to be a society of sun worshippers by the way they sit with their eyes closed and their faces positioned toward the sun. From the expression on their faces, I sensed that some were even talking to the sun, imploring it to keep showering its warmth on them, praising the sun for providing them with pleasure. And I had exactly the same, I don't say problem. When you grow up in kind of northern climate, and our summers used to be pretty mild, so you don't have hot weather often. It's always cloudy or overcast. So every time there's a bright sun and warmth, like you running outside to be on the sun to get tan. And it took me a long time when I moved to Michigan. I lived here full time. It would be in the summer. Anytime I see the sun, I'll be running outside or lay down in the sun or take kids to the beach. So it took me quite a few years to finally, I soaked up enough sun that I kind of lost that edge and I'm not hungry for sun anymore. But that's what happens when you live in the climates. I mean, like, I bet you people who live in Canada, they're probably hungry for sun. Okay, so now it looks like our hero is settling down in Uganda, although he has only temporarily visa and he is teaching in local college and he's very happy. And now he started analyzing Russian characteristics. I found this quite interesting. So he says, first, Russian nature tends to be arrogant. I found their deep-rooted conceit that Russians' ideas, culture, history, and accomplishments are superior to the rest of the world. So he found it very distasteful. And it's back to the same thing. If you look at the modern Russia, that's what blossomed again under Putin, is the pushing the idea that Russian culture and history is way more superior than the rest of the world. Then Robert continues. Second, there is an aspect of Russian behavior that is madly unpredictable, which I think may be the result of their brutally cold winters. We actually had this expression, the отмороженный. If you call somebody who is like acting very stupid or strange, that he's like has his brains frozen. Some days you could just not understand what was wrong with the Russian woman. Well, I think it's not just the Russian woman. For that matter, with the Russian man. When the temperature would drop to 32 or 35 degrees below zero, I think you're probably talking about Celsius, I knew I would begin to witness aberrant behavior. I often saw women suddenly stop what they were doing, look vacantly into space, begin weeping, and become short-tempered. Friends of mine sometimes complained to me that their wives were acting strangely and they could not figure out what was wrong. Well, welcome to the club, buddy. Men will become easily provoked and would start yelling at each other even at slight misunderstandings. The men in my shop who were normally talkative would come to work and refuse to speak all day except when it was absolutely necessary to clarify some aspects of job. When I would say good morning to fellow worker during one of his moods, it was not unusual for him to ignore me altogether. Oh my goodness, it brought me memories of the movie Red Heat with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Remember when he's playing a Russian cop, Danko, and he's talking to American police officer, and he was like, well, how do you relax in Russia? We're watching the fish in a tank, and Arnold replied, vodka. It's actually funny, but it's actually true. So as his stories continues, he already spent a whole year in Uganda, and you say, well, looks like he's taking his sweet time before returning to America. But that's the problem. Robert Robertson is a citizen of the Soviet Union. And welcome to the club. You can't just go to America because you want to. If you're a citizen of the USSR, you actually need to get an American visa. And if you remember, he got in trouble with the United States government because for a while he was a mouthpiece of Soviet propaganda. So now he's in trouble. He would like to return to the United States, but he was thinking his chances were actually extremely limited I had only been a naturalized citizen, he says, and from my encounter from Ambassador Bullitt nearly 40 years earlier, I assumed that my files with State Department or the Immigration Naturalization Service contain damaging statements that would block my chances with the U.S. government. So he basically decided to approach a different route and applied for a Jamaican passport on the grounds that Jamaica was the country of his birth. And I'm skipping some parts, but he finally managed to get a visitor visa to come to America for 3 months. And he returned to his hometown of New York City. And check this out. This is, 44 years later. Manhattan was different than I had imagined, and I was especially saddened to see how much Harlem had deteriorated. I had expected it to be better than it had been in 1933, not worse. We walked down the 125th Street, the 7th Avenue, which used to be full of well-dressed high rollers. But now it was a dump. And when I saw the condition of the people, I asked my brother, so his brother is still alive, who lived in the US all this time, when it had started happening. I had been told that blacks were politically, economically, and socially better off in the United States, so I had expected something much better. So Comrade Robinson managed to escape Soviet Union in 1974, and only in 1980 he got a green card. He says his friend Bill Davis said, "I now declare that Robert Robinson is a legal resident of the United States of America," he said. So then Robert Robinson sent a letter to the Soviet embassy in Jamaica renouncing his Soviet citizenship and then returned my Soviet passport to them. I would keep passport. Just say I lost it. Because the Soviet government could still technically have claimed me as a Soviet citizen. They could have picked me up anywhere at any time. I didn't want to become visible because if they had gotten me inside of the Soviet embassy, I would have been in the Soviet territory. So when you get a green card, you have a legal status to live and work in the United States, but you're not a citizen. And finally, on December 6, 1986, so I was 25. No, 15, my bad. Not 25, 15. His dream of 40 years came true. I became an American citizen once again. Okay, now we're at chapter 35, Perestroika. Ever since I escaped from the Soviet Union in 1974, I have kept up my observations from the outside. Whatever I could find about the Soviet Union, I have read. And here he gives some advice to the free world because he worries about survival of the free world. He says, "I'm burdened by my knowledge that Soviet Communist Party members believe it is their country's destiny to dominate the world. The message is everywhere. It is drummed into the heads of party members 5 days a week at meetings after work, which they must attend and which non-party members who want to gain favor from the officials in charge of their jobs should attend. Children are influenced from the early age. They learn in school, in the meetings of the young pioneers, and as members of Komsomol that it is Soviet destiny to defeat America and dominate the world." Not really. Soviet destiny is pretty much the general concept of Marxism, Leninism, that socialism and communism can only survive. It's everywhere in the world. So it's just a Marxist theory, although, the latest was we believe in a peaceful coexistence. I think it's Khrushchev came up with that concept. But, in reality, it's still like, and this is what in the end happened, that socialism didn't work because it was contained just in several countries. It didn't spread around. Then he continues, "In 1972, so I was 1 year old, when the Soviet economy was clearly going downhill, America should have let them keep sliding. But instead, Americans publicly, privately stepped in to help the Soviets. I was still there when the Soviets first began buying American grain. The Russian people had no idea where the grain was coming from. When I left in 1974, the Soviet factories were still using machinery imported during 1930s. So that's Stalin's socialist miracle when he starved millions of peasants to buy equipment from all over the world, especially United States. After 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week for 40 years, the machines were in bad shape. They were breaking down and needed repair, but the Soviets would not take the time to repair them adequately. Well, they didn't have parts anyway, since they were making war material, which was in constant demand. In my factory, they were having difficulty making precision bearings. The Russians never officially addressed the rumors circulating in Moscow that they were using Swedish or American bearings in their airplanes instead of their own, because Russian-made bearings would crack when heated. Now, I don't know why he never mentioned, but I believe his factory, which was making bearings, that was Italian factory. Italians purchased tons of oil from Stalin, and in exchange they sold the ball bearing factory, and I believe his was Italian. And he continues, how is America to deal with the Soviet Union today? So this book is written like around 1986. So right, Gorbachev at power, still Soviet Union there, perestroika going on. In most cases, butter is better than bullets. In every case, peace is better than war. Well, now we have war. Provided territorial integrity and personal freedom and dignity remain intact. Here we go. Territorial integrity. That didn't happen. Can America persuade the Soviet Union to change its quest for world domination? Should America encourage or attempt to prevent increased trade between two countries? What steps can be taken to create trust and diminish suspicion between these superpowers? What does the Soviets need from America today, and what should be America's response? And he continues here. I see clearly the Soviet Union urgently needs 3 things: time, machinery, and technology. They need enough time so they can catch up with the level of Western economic development. They need to retool their factories with new machinery, and they need to scrap the piecework system if they wish to match quality of consumer products in Western countries. And I'm actually planning to make several videos on this topic, because definitely the Soviets didn't have time. Just 5 years later, in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed, and they just didn't have money to update the equipment. And it's how I look why Soviet economy or post-Soviet economy collapsed so quick, because I personally didn't realize how far behind our industries were, except space and maybe some military. Like consumer goods, everything else was so behind, so outdated, that there was no chance to compete. Because if you look at the history of like any American industry, car industry, tractor industry, airplane industry, if you look at the history, it looks like a graveyard. There are so many great companies that were doing great products, but they didn't survive, and they bankrupt, closed down. Hudson, Nash, there's so many airplane companies that no one hears anymore, right? Studebaker, same with the tractors. When I look a little bit into tractor history in the United States, I was like, oh my God, there were so many tractor companies, when it was a hot thing to make tractors for farmers. Now we had pretty much John Deere and Case, who else left? So like in Soviet Union, those car factories that the Americans brought into the Soviet Union in 1930s, they still were in business by 1990s. Not a single company went bankrupt. So the whole country, it was like a bunch of dodo birds that never had competition, never had to compete, never had to improve, never had to update their equipment, put new, things in place. So once the gate opened and we were open to the foreign competition, there was no hope. The Western companies came in. They even didn't have to come in. Used 10-year-old BMW was way better than brand new Lada car. So, every factory started having problems selling their crappy products because they were so outdated, except like maybe Ural motorcycles. They were so outdated that they were cool again. It's like literally they manufacture brand new antique motorcycles that no one else makes in the world because they're so outdated, and they're cool again. All right, so now we have the final words. Robert Robertson thinks that Soviet Union should permit freedom of travel for its citizens out of and back into the USSR. Check. Stop provocations and disinformation programs. Diminish its programmed hatred for America. Failed there too. And number 4, be completely truthful to its own people. That was for a short period of time, but now with Putin rule, it's back to old Soviet normal. The United States should 1. Learn how to be patient in negotiation with Soviets. The Soviets might be operating on a different timetable. We need to care more about the substance of agreement than about any deadline to reach it. Number 2, recognize that the Truman Doctrine of containment is no longer valid. Number 3, whenever possible, encourage exchange visits by Soviet and American citizens. Hey, I was a part of it. So they can communicate on a person-to-person basis. Number 4, encourage the study of the Russian language in the early stages of schools in America, so our new leaders will have a better understanding of what our adversaries are all about, and our ordinary citizens will be better equipped to carry the message of freedom and democracy directly to Soviet citizens. I lived as an American citizen during my early adult years. For the next 44 years, I lived and worked in the Soviet Union, side by side with its people. Having now been blessed with the opportunity to live out the rest of my life as an American citizen once again, I have written this account so that anyone who wishes may learn from what life in the Soviet Union is really like. Robert Robertson. And that, my friends, concludes my super long review of the book 44 Years in the Soviet Union by Robert Robertson. It's really interesting. I'm very impressed, and I'm so happy that this book actually triggered search for other books, like another one by Homer Smith, Black Man in the Red Russia, and some others. So more will follow, but this is the final chapter of my 30-part book review. I hope you enjoyed this video. Well, as always, if you made it that far, thank you so much for watching and listening to Ushanka Show. Don't forget to like this video. And I probably will combine all 30 episodes in one super long video. So it will be my Ushanka Digest. And for those people who use my voice to fall asleep, it will be extra long help in that department. Thanks again for watching Ushanka Show. We'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.